Hello, my name is Héctor Armienta. I'm a composer, but I'm also the artistic director of Opera Cultura. Welcome to another episode of Los Revolucionarios, a program devoted to the work of Latinx artists, changing the face of opera on and off stage. And I'm very excited that today we'll be joined by wonderful stage director, David Radamés Toro. So welcome, David. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you. We'll talk a little bit about some future work that we're doing together, that you're doing, about that's featuring my work. But it's good to see you since the Opera America conference. So tell us quickly. Tell us how were you first introduced to opera?
I got two stories, and they're both short.
All
The
righty.
first one was my piano teacher took me to see Don Giovanni when I was like 12, and then after that it was Boris Godunov and a concert version, and then I eventually I auditioned for choir at school, and then joined the choir corps, the opera chorus of back in Colorado Springs, the Colorado Opera Festival, and then it all went from there.
Wow.
And
Wow. And so what was, I mean, so you were introduced as a singer,
Mhm.
But how did you transition into stage directing?
It was during my master's degree. I went to Ohio State for my master's, and I kind of got adopted by the theater department. And that's where I met my mentor, Jenny Thompson, and she taught me viewpoints and Suzuki and mime and all these physical theater aspects that got me interested in translating all of that to opera. And so I started studying directing in theater, and then later on started to assist in the opera department.
Wow, that's interesting. So Suzuki. So tell me a little bit about that. That's no one's ever mentioned that before, is it?
Theater practitioner, teacher, pedagogue, director named Suzuki Tadashi in Japan created this acting technique methodology training that's influenced by like no theater and kabuki and a lot of his own acting methodologies that trains the body to act more or less. A lot of connection to the stage, repetition of techniques, specific exercises in order to connect center of gravity, energy produced by the actor, and breathing that allows the actor to kind of more or less do almost anything on stage and connect those in a very beautiful way.
And how have you translated that into how you direct singers on stage?
There's a lot about the regimentedness of it that works with singers. Like timing is a big aspect of it. There are exercises that are fast and slow, which we are an art form that deals in meter and rhythm and duration. And so how do you get one person from one side of the other stage to the other while still remaining engaged? There's also a lot of aspect of stillness within Suzuki, and the idea that stillness is active stillness. So your preparation to move, to react. And when I direct, and even when I teach young singers, it's like, how do we stand still that still draws attention to us and transfer all of that energy, the energy of singing itself, into dramatic performance?
So you prior to recording, you had mentioned a couple of operas that you've directed in the past. I think one of them you said for Minnesota Opera. Which one was that?
The most recent one was Cruzar la Cara de la Luna. It was a fully orchestrated production of it that we premiered last November, and then because it was a co-production with Austin Opera, we did back in February of 2024.
And what tools, in terms of your experience and what you've learned, did you incorporate in the staging of that piece?
It's a opera that is 75 minutes long, and it moves really quickly. So like taking theater ideas of how do you separate aspects of the stage so that simultaneous scenes can happen, or that you can move in and out of scenes that may be only like 5 minutes long. I felt like that was honestly invaluable to put this opera onto the stage, because the opera itself goes back and forth from present time to like 50 years in the past, 30 years in the past, and so forth. And how do we accomplish that without long breaks in order to change the set, or how do characters interact with memory that doesn't necessarily always have to be like direct naturalism or realism? I think especially the viewpoints training was invaluable for that.
And I have seen the work. I like it very much. But yes, so there are flashbacks in the work. Do I remember correctly?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so, and you said some of the scenes or locations are only 5 minutes long, or is that just one?
There are some of them. Yeah. There's longer ones, like the wedding scene's pretty long. Maybe that's about 8 minutes. Like there's a middle scene, the crossing of the desert scene, that's also pretty long. But like there's one scene where the main character Latino steps into a past memory of when his best friend convinced him to come to America, and that's one song. So it was about like 5-6 minutes. There was a pretty brief scene. So how do you move from a man that's in his hospice bed into his past memory of his hometown and then back into his hospice bed?
Mm-hmm. Tell me what, I mean, you directed quite a bit. Is there an opera that you have yet to direct that you really want to?
I have a list, when people ask. I really would love to do a Dutchman. I have some pretty great ideas for that one. I want to do Florencia. I want to do.
For the audience, why don't you tell us who composed Florencia?
Daniel Catan.
Yes, yes, of course. Yes.
Florencia. I've worked on Il Postino before. I assisted that one years ago. That's another one I'd love to do. I want to do a lot more kind of Latino American opera as well. Like we're doing Zorro together, and then even throw some queer opera into it, like Before Night Falls, Harvey Milk. I got a long list that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, yeah. So for everyone, I have an opera titled Zorro. It's going to be produced by Opera San Jose in the spring, and then it goes on to Arizona Opera in the late fall of next year, and David's going to be directing it. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to do with the piece. Tell us another question. It's interesting. I'm Mexican American, and for whatever reason, I've decided to focus my work on the Latinx cultural experience. But not all of us who have that history or that culture necessarily gravitate toward doing that. And as you've just kind of mentioned, you're interested in doing work that's sort of beyond, that cultural experience. How does your history, your family history, your roots inform the work that you do?
All artists kind of usually they put a piece of themselves into their art, and my heritage is inseparable from who I am. It's because I've had that question before, and it made me think about that. So like how Mexican, I'm Mexican, so my mom's Mexican American, my dad's Puerto Rican, and they're matriarchy. So like the way I approach female identifying characters in operas is heavily influenced by these very strong women in my life who are Latinas, the religiosity of heritage, like a friend of mine jokes that Dave is always going to put some Catholic imagery in something, but just like that's a part of what I grew up with and who I am, and like I can identify that in works, whether they are Latino American or they're I'm doing an Orfeo, this next spring, and how do I pour myself into that? It's inseparable. Like even the idea of like a character who feels out of place. I grew up in very predominantly white areas. I grew up in Colorado Springs, and so being like the only Latino kid in a class that's not, what is it like to feel like an outsider or someone who has to code switch their identity just to survive? And then where do we find that in character struggles? So it's a part of me, and I pour myself into what I do.
Mm-hmm. So when you're directing works that are by Latinx creators, do you feel sort of are there certain expectations when they hire you that you're going to be sort of the oracle of everything that has to do with the Latinx culture, and they come to you? I mean, if you're producing for some, sort of a, predominantly, a non-Latino organization, which almost 99% of them. I mean, what happens when you walk into that space? Not that space, but when you're in these production meetings and you're talking to the general directors.
Generally, if it's not a if it's something from the inherited repertory, the European repertory, I have been lucky enough. If lucky is even the word, I have not been in a situation where someone's like, "So how are you going to put your Latin spin on this?"
Yeah.
Um, that that hasn't been a thing. But when it does come to doing, Latinx works, there is kind of that expectation.
Right.
But whether it's the expectational work itself, it's also just forces me to dig more into my family, into my heritage, and all of that. So yeah.
So how did you approach Cruzar?
Cruzar, it's funny, like me and even the rest of the creative team is like, we just saw our families in this. Cruzar, I'm third generation. My mom and I try to figure out whether I'm second or third. But what's beautiful about that piece is that it shows Mexican Americans across generations. So I could find myself in Diana, who admits that her Spanish isn't great. I saw my grandfather in the character Latino because the last days of their lives are very similar. And even the trying to communicate across language barriers and whatnot. It was easy to identify with the characters in that opera. And even all of us, the first day we sat down, all the performers and we just talked through the show and talked about similar experiences, how we related to it. It was being in an environment where my Mexican heritage wasn't the outside culture, or wasn't treated especially like the niche culture, which I found beautiful, honestly.
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully we'll talk about Zorro at another time, but how are you approaching Zorro?
Zorro, I'm doing my research, especially the pop research. Zorro the is on Disney Plus, so watching some of those, reading the pop novels, but also digging into the history of it, colonial California. It's just something that outside of California, learning California history, that most people don't even think about or remember that that was Imperial Spain. And within Imperial Spain, there was a caste system: the Spanish, the Mestizo, and the Indians.
Yes.
And so, how do
And
these
that carried on into the Mexican government? Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it still has its own inkling, sadly, and colorism within the culture at times. But digging into the history itself and the class structure, and then how the characters interact with each other and what their goals are, their missions.
Yeah.
So doing my dramaturgy for it.
Yeah, and then you're also a musician, I mean, because you sang.
Yes.
So you're able to read the score. Some wonderful, fantastic stage directors are not necessarily musicians. So I guess there'll be also opportunities for you, which is probably I'm sure what you've done with all the other pieces that you've directed, is to really try to understand the score and where it speaks. Yeah.
I'm very much a director who I kind of love that decoding the music. Like, what's it saying here? What was our expectation? That expectation wasn't fulfilled. So what is that saying dramatically? What are we getting out of this aria? So what is how the music, the drama, and the text all intertwine to tell this story? And then having a live composer too, being able to ask questions about what was your intent when you wrote this, or what did you see in your head, is also a beautiful
Yeah, I really enjoyed our brief little luncheon at the Upper America Conference to talk about Zorro. It was yeah, it was good for me. It was fun to talk about the music, and I really appreciate the care that you're taking in in everything as you approach it. So you told me a little bit about sort of my last question. But you told me a little bit about what operas you would like to direct. But is there any other sort of journey that you're on, other than your work as a stage director? That's related to opera. I would just say related to opera. Yeah.
I would like to continue working in the expansion of the Latino American repertory. I think it's very important that our stories are part of it, that because it expands beyond into the histories, teaching the mythologies, and what it means to be Latinx now, what it means to be second, third generation, how we can bring these stories and tell them from musical, cultural, and dramatic standpoints. That's something that's very important to me, whether it's directing them or I'm starting my brief hand at libretto writing right now.
Oh, exciting.
Or eventually producing producing those type of operas, but just contributing Latinx American culture to the opera repertoire is very important to me.
Well, that's good to hear. Good to hear, David. All right. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time for the interview. I'm sure I'll see you very soon. And I wish you all the best. And first, what's the next production that you're doing? So
the next thing, I'm heading to Washington National to assist on Macbeth.
Great.
And then I'm doing Orfeo in the spring.
Wow. Wow. Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, again, for joining another episode of Los Revolucionarios, a program devoted to the work of Latinx artists changing the face of opera on and off stage. And again, wish you all the best, David.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Bye.